All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's 4 o'clock, and I want to get started as on time as possible. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem, and I'm with IFAS Extension in Alachua County, Florida. And today, what I want us to talk about is, the topic is selecting plants for the perfect summer landscape. So I know many of us in the state, we have to deal with humidity and heat, full sun in some cases, full shade in some other cases. But what we wanted to do as part of this presentation today is just talk about some of the plants that both myself and the Master Gardener volunteers that we really like to use, or we like to use within landscapes because we know that they're tough and they do really, really well in our environmental conditions. So this is not a whole encompassing presentation. We actually found that it was difficult to whittle down some of the plants that we're going to talk about today. So I'll go ahead, and I have a PowerPoint presentation. Let me go ahead and pull that up for you all so you can see it. Wonderful. So again, my name is Dr. Taylor Clem with IFAS Extension, Alachua County. There's a couple things I want to talk about. At the bottom of the screen, you can see there's a chat box. Feel free to respond to any questions, or there's also the Q&A box that you can open up. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into that Q&A box for us. We have a Master Gardener that can help respond to those questions that you have, as well as I'll try to respond to some of those as we move through the program together. But let's go ahead and get going. So when we talk about selecting plants for the perfect summer landscape, go ahead and open up the chat box. What are some of the things that you think about when you are considering that or what you define as that perfect summer landscape? And I'll see what people say. Yeah, what can withstand full sun? Color, it's really good. One that waters itself. That's a really good one. Minimal maintenance, color for heat. Yeah, for those high heat areas. Drought tolerance. Yeah, that's very, very good. Dear Artie, I like that one. Good. So a lot of past experiences, what didn't work in the past? Why did they not work? It's very important. So that perfect summer landscape, as well as pollinators. So how can our plants attract pollinators? That's really important. When we think of that summer landscape, who's buzzing around or flying around our landscapes? So, as well as some other perennials versus annuals. Perfect. So let's go ahead and get started. That's some great things that you consider, that we think about. And what I want us to do is, at the end of this program, I want us to be able to answer, what is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program? Some of you are probably very aware of the program. I know some of you are. Some of you probably never heard of it before. But I want us to be able to briefly talk about the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, because selecting the proper plants for our summer landscapes, it's all part of that. But ultimately, the other question is, I want you to feel comfortable or confident, and you be able to answer or help answer which different types of plants are great for the summer landscape. So let's go ahead and move forward, and let's talk about the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, it is a set of 9 principles. It's a statewide program here in Florida, and those 9 different best management practices, or 9 different principles that we follow for the program. The whole idea is, it's an integrated approach to maintain an attractive, colorful, and diverse landscape. So, you want to have color, you want to have something that you can maintain, and you want to make sure that you can have something that's friendly to wildlife, it's environmentally responsible. And with Florida Friendly landscapes, depending on how you manage it and how it's prepared, they can be substantially less amount of work compared to a traditional landscape. But ultimately, it comes down to 2 big goals, which is conserving water and protecting water quality. The question that I asked at the very beginning of, what do you think is the perfect summer landscape? Some of you mentioned water as part of those. Is how do I use water? One individual mentioned plants that water themselves, but we think about that. What are plants that we can put them in the landscape and they can thrive? So the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program really comes back to water quality and quantity, as well as we think about how it attracts wildlife to the landscape as well. But I did mention those 9 principles, and these are the 9 principles that we do with the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program. We follow with the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program. The first one, a lot of us hear about all the time, that's right plant, right place. Right plant, right place, that is essentially we are matching plants to the environmental conditions in which we want to plant. So say you have a sunny side of your landscape that has very well-drained soils. You're not going to want to put a plant in there that prefers full shade and needs to live in a moist landscape. That plant is not suited for that space. So that first principle, right plant, right place, if we follow that principle, the subsequent 8 principles start to fall in line very, very easily. So the second principle we have is water efficiently. So if you plant the right plant in the right place, you won't have to irrigate nearly as much once that plant is established. A lot of the plants that we have, native species, non-native species that we bring in, if they match those environmental conditions, they don't require much supplemental irrigation at all, except during times of high drought, period. The third one is fertilize appropriately. Again, if you have a landscape where you're planting plants to meet certain needs, you don't have to fertilize as much. So if we fertilize appropriately, we're making sure that we're reducing pollutants that end up into our waterways. Fourth principle is mulch. Fifth is attract wildlife. Sixth is manage yard pests. 7 is recycle. 8 is reduce stormwater runoff. And 9 is protect the waterfront. So following all these principles, it all comes back to water quality and quantity and ways that we can attract wildlife to the landscape. But today's discussion is going to primarily fall into that right plant, right place. When we think of those summer landscapes, you know, we think about, or plants for those summer landscapes, we're thinking about what plants can thrive in those summer conditions. So I know that sun and moisture were already mentioned, but what are some of those other conditions, those environmental conditions that you think about when we're trying to figure out what are the right plants for the right place? What are some of the environmental conditions beyond water and, I can't remember the other one said, water and sunlight. Go ahead and put those in the chat box. Soil conditions, that's a really, really good one. If you have, I know one of our attendees today from up north, you know, their soil conditions are gonna be so different from ours. Ours, very high sandy soils where water just disappears quickly through the soil profile. You know, compare a sandy soil to a soil that has sand and some clay or some loam within it. You know, this could be completely different conditions. So other things that we have, humidity, temperature during night and day. So temperature, yeah, climate is very, very important. And humidity does play a factor in which plants we can plant. Heat tolerance, yes. So, you know, we have a lot of tropical plants in Florida, but those are pretty much growing in South Florida. Up in this north central part of the state, we can't grow a lot of those tropical plants. So sun, yeah. Distance to water source, it's a very, very good thing to consider when designing and planting a garden. And the amount of rain that we get through June through October. Yeah, our rainy season versus our dry season. And drainage, so excellent. So y'all are naming some really, really cool things that we need to think about. So we're gonna hit, when we talk about all the plants this afternoon, we're gonna hit some of the major characteristics. But one thing that wasn't named that is very, very important is the size of a plant. How big will plant material get? You don't want to put a plant that gets to 10 feet tall in front of windows or because otherwise it's going to require constant pruning and trimming to maintain a certain size. Whereas if we select a plant that we let to grow to its mature height, yeah, someone mentioned or under power lines. Obviously you don't want a tree growing up into power lines. So we need to think about the size of a plant, and we include some of that information as well. But one thing I think is really important to note is when we're talking about water quality and quantity, in the state of Florida, approximately 60% of homeowner water use in Florida is attributed to lawn and landscape irrigation. That's a lot. That's a lot of water, 60%, where we know that with flora-friendly landscaping programs, with a flora-friendly landscaping program and following those best management practices for watering efficiently, we can significantly reduce that amount of water use down to about 10% of that original quantity. So that's a huge reduction. But another big issue is, you know, with the use of fertilizers or some other sources, we have non-point source pollutants, and that can carry some of those pollution like nitrogen and phosphorus into our water bodies, which can lead to those algal blooms and fish kills within our freshwater ways. But, so let's go ahead and let's jump in to the plants for the summer landscape. So plants for the summer landscape, I kind of chunked into 4 different areas. There's so many other plants that we can talk about. Like I didn't talk about ornamental grasses or vines, just because of making sure that we have enough time to be able to talk about the plants that we do have. But at the end, I have some resources that I can share with you that help you find appropriate plants to help match those environmental conditions. So we did have a question come in under the Q&A regarding yard pests. Where do grasshoppers fit? So we have some lovers. They're pretty pesky pests in the landscape, especially here in the state of Florida. They don't really have too many predators, and there's not many insecticides that can go after them. So typically it's going to be mechanical, trying to do mechanical removal of them, dropping them into sudsy water or soapy water, smushing them. So they can be tricksters. That's a good question. So let's go ahead and jump right into ground covers. And some of these are going to be native, some are non-native, but I picked a lot of plants that I think are very common in the landscape. So the first one I want us to talk about is perennial peanut. This is it's becoming more and more common as a ground cover. Some people are actually using this in lieu of turf grass in their landscapes. So perennial peanut is the USDA hardiness zone, so that's climate. The climate zone of 8B to all the way through zone 10. It's from Central America, is where it's native to, or South America. But it does well primarily in full sun to that part shade conditions. It's going to prefer like well-drained to medium-drained soils, but it has a really, really high drought tolerance, which is amazing. But it does stay low. It stays low. That's why it's typically, people will prefer it to like as an alternative to turf grass. But it can spread about 5 feet. So typically when you get perennial peanut, you're planting them at about like 5 foot on center or 4 foot on center spacing, depending on the size that you have, in hopes that it can spread and fill in the area that you want it to grow. But a really nice thing about perennial peanut is it's a nitrogen fixing plant. So rather than like a lot of plants, you have to add supplemental nitrogen to the landscape so they can take up that nutrient to grow. But perennial peanut, it's a nitrogen fixer. So there's a whole class of plants where they have the ability to collect atmospheric nitrogen and convert it to a form in which they can uptake within their roots. So we typically call those nitrogen fixing. So this is a nitrogen fixing plant, which is really, really nice. And one thing that we really like it is this time of year, you get those amazing yellow flowers starting to pop up all over the landscape. If you're ever close to the University of Florida's campus or a lot of our right-of-ways around Alachua County, you'll see perennial peanut is intermixed in a lot of those right-of-ways because it's easy to maintain. It's really low maintenance, but it's strong and adaptable. It's not going to have the foot traffic tolerance that like our turf grasses do, but it does pretty well. But perennial peanut, this is one that we really like. The next one is Asiatic jasmine. So with the Asiatic jasmine, we call it, or Traculospermum asiaticum is the Latin name. It does well in 8B to 10 or through 10. It prefers full sun to part shade, and it likes well-drained to medium-drained soils. In a height, it can get up to about 2 feet, 18 inches, and it can really spread. But typically what you're seeing is when you install a new landscape, you get tiny little plugs, and you put those plugs pretty close together to help fill in that space pretty quickly. It's very adaptable. It's very strong. It's an evergreen landscape ground cover. So if you have an area of your landscape that, you know, turf grass might not get the full sun that it needs, you can use this as an alternative. And a really nice thing about it is you can mow it periodically. You'd have to set your mower as high as possible, but you can mow it, as well as you can string trim it and edge it pretty easily to help keep it shape, because it does like to spread and crawl. So it's just a nice way to make sure that you can make sure it doesn't get into other parts of your landscape beds. But this jasmine is really nice. Another alternative to that is the Confederate jasmine, but it will want to climb. So you got to give it something to climb. But this is a great ground cover that'll stay low to the ground. This is one that I really like. I have this growing outside my house right now. A turkey tangle or frog fruit. It's one of our native ground covers. And I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful plant. The flowers aren't too large, they're rather nondescript, but once they all start flowering, sometimes they're easily mischaracterized as like a clover or something like that. But that's just because you got those tiny little white flowers. But if you get up close, you can actually tell the difference pretty easily. But we're seeing that in zone 8B to 10. It's going to prefer that full sun to part shade conditions. And moisture is, we will prefer something, or it's going to prefer something that's more well drained to medium drained. It doesn't like having its feet wet. Its roots won't grow very well, and it won't be able to set in the landscape. But it does have a medium drought tolerance, so it does pretty well. And it does stay nice and low. Sometimes it'll end up in like landscape beds, and you'll really never notice there. It just kind of fills in naturally. But it's a great native ground cover, but also it's a larval food plant source for a lot of our butterflies. So, and also when you mow it, it actually can improve its health. So this is a really great one. This one can be a little bit harder to find than the other two, but some of your native nurseries in Florida, they'll have some of it available for you. So I did have a question that come through is, for the ground covers, which one would handle light foot traffic for the field, like if you're walking out filling bird feeders? So when it comes to ground covers, the perennial peanut, the Asiatic jasmine, as well as this fog fruit will actually all do really well for a light amount of traffic. I believe the Asiatic jasmine does the best with the higher amounts of traffic, but it also stays a little bit higher. So I know some people don't like walking through it. But all of these first three do really well with low amounts of traffic. Great question. This ground cover I really like. This is another one of our natives. You can use this as just like a low plant that you use on the edge of your landscape beds. This Tampa vervain or verbena. Beautiful, beautiful plant. I love the purple flowers. So with that purple, I really like using purples in the landscape when I'm thinking about landscape design, because you can use it either as a cool color or a warm color. So it's very interchangeable in how you can mix it in with different plants very easily. But it does prefer full sun and well-drained soils. So it's gonna like that heat, limited moisture, because it's really, really high drought tolerance. And it can be about 2 feet by 2 feet. So it's a really good accent plant or clumping plant that you can put within your landscape. And it produces those little purple flowers throughout the summer, as well as it's a larval source for butterflies. So it'll attract some butterflies to your landscape as well. So I really like this landscape plant. And I know with our plant sale that we're going to have, we had a lot of these that we're going to sell, but this is one that I know the master gardeners and myself, we love using. This time of year, as you're driving around the county, you'll notice the tick seed or the coreopsis in full bloom. It's like rivers of yellow all throughout the streets, throughout the rural parts of the county. It's beautiful. But coreopsis is a great ground cover that you can use. You can get it as seed mixes, and you can just overseed areas and kind of just let it naturalize and grow. If you're interested in converting parts of your landscape to wildflower areas, feel free to reach out to us. We have those resources as well. But the tick seed, or Coreopsis, it prefers zone 8A to 10B, and as well full sun to partial sun, well-drained soils. It has a medium drought tolerance, but it gets about 2 by 3 feet. This is a really tough ground cover, and it adds a lot of interest in the landscape, as well as it's a great pollinator source, so it's going to attract a lot of great wildlife to your landscape. So I'm going to cover some bonus plants. These bonus plants, these are some of the ones that I wanted to talk about, but I just knew we wouldn't have time. But one that I really like is Blue Days. It's a great little ground cover, stays nice and low with little blue flowers. And in this picture, you're looking at the native sunshine mimosa. So the Mimosa striolosa, it's a really great ground cover. It's also the touch sensitive one. So it's the kind when you touch it, all the leaflets kind of start to fold up together. But this is a great ground cover. I've met some people that actually use mimosa as the entire ground cover in their landscape. They like ripped out their turf and put down sunshine mimosa. It was actually looking really, really nice. So one of the negatives about it is sometimes it could end up being weedy. Like in this picture, you can see some clover intermixed with it, but that's not that big of a deal. So let's go ahead and jump forward. We'll go to the annuals and perennials. So the first one we have is the twin flower. And the twin flower plant, it's still going to stay kind of low, about 2 feet high, and you get about 3 feet wide, sometimes a little bit wider, sometimes a little bit shorter. It's a very fast growing perennial, but it has, oops, I have the wrong description on there, but you're going to see it in that full sun to partial shade conditions. It's going to be well-drained landscape soil conditions, and it has a moderate drought tolerance. So when we talk about drought tolerance, some of the conditions that we're concerned about is how long of a period do we go without rain to that point in which you need to apply some type of supplemental irrigation. Every plant can be completely different. Even where they're placed in the landscape can be completely different. So it's always important that if you have your irrigation system turned off, and you're inspecting for those drought signs. So always be vigilant and look for those plants. They usually do really well in these drought periods, but just it's important to make sure that if they need some supplemental irrigation, you can do so. But a twin flower, a great ground cover that has those beautiful little blue flowers on it. This one I really liked. It's one of our natas, the forked blue curls. We'll see this in from zone 8 to 11. It has full sun, well drained, very, very high drought tolerance, and gets about 2 by 2. The one thing I really like about it is it's self-seeding. So it's going to seed itself, and you'll see it pop back each year. It attracts a lot of pollinators, and it's known to be very fragrant. So it's a really nice plant to have in your landscape, especially if you have a naturalistic landscape, kind of let it pop up. You can buy this in containers. And you can bring them into the landscape. But I know some homeowners that they've had the same perennial self-seeding itself for years. This one I really like. This is a very fine textured perennial, but I really like this euphorbia, diamond frost euphorbia. We see it in 9B to 11, so we'll see it kind of in protected areas in Alachua County. We still might be a little bit cooler, especially if you're in the northern parts of Alachua County, up towards High Springs, because that's more like an 8B range. But it does prefer the full sun to part shade. It does really like the well-drained conditions that has a really high drought tolerance. This one gets a little bit larger than the others. It gets about 3 by 3. But when it looks really nice, these fine texture plants, you know, sometimes put them in contrast with, say, a plant that has larger leaves or more coarse, look to them, or those larger leaves. But that fine texture plant adds a lot of softness to a landscape. So it can really be nice to use it as an accent plant in some conditions. But this diamond frost euphorbia is a beautiful, beautiful plant. This one's one of my favorites. I like it primarily because I think it's a really nice shrub, but also I love its name, the bat-faced Cuphea. So this gets its name because if you look at the image of the flower, it looks kind of like a bat face. But it prefers that USDA hardiness zone of 9 to 11. It does prefer partial shade. As well, it doesn't need really well-drained soils, but it can have medium-drained soils, but it has a really high drought tolerance. So it's a pretty tough plant, especially during those drought periods. But it can get 2 by 2, but I really like that warm, rich red color. Using that, especially when you start getting the shadier conditions, the shady conditions start to make landscapes feel a little cool. So if you add some warm colors to them, it helps lift up the vibrancy of that landscape, helps make it seem a little bit more lively, or it has the ability to do that. So it's a very showy landscape color that it provides. It's a great accent plant. You can put it in massings. And as well, it attracts a lot of wildlife. The blackberry lily, this one, one of my favorite parts about it is when I use it in the landscape is I can hide it among a lot of other plants pretty easily, but once it's flowering, I like the dynamic colors of the bloom itself. It's like that orangey, reddish, yellow. It helps really warm up part of the landscape, but we'll see this in North Florida. It's 8 to 10A in its zone, full sun to partial shade, so it has some variability in those light conditions that it prefers. But it does really like well-drained soils. So it doesn't like to have its feet wet for too terribly long, but it does have a medium drought tolerance. This one's gonna be more clumping of a plant. So you can see in this image that seems a little bit more erect, but this is a great plant that you can use. Because I know sometimes we like to think about different flowering plants or perennials that can help add color. This is a pretty good show-stopping when it's flowering. So some bonus plants to talk about. These are some of the ones that we decided to nix off the list for today. The annuals and perennials that's still really interesting to talk about is our native milkweeds. All of our native milkweeds are amazing. They are incredibly important nectar food sources for butterflies as well as their larval hosts for the monarch butterfly. So it's a really nice thing is they will die back in the winter and then they'll come back in the spring, which is important for our monarchs because there's some concern about some of the tropical milkweed and what it can do with the health of the monarch population. So we prefer those native milkweeds. Other annuals, perennials, we have bulbine. I really like bulbine. It has a really nice orange color to it. It seems like it's almost something you'd see in the desert Southwest. You can plant it with some aloes or agave. It has a really nice form and texture to it, but once you get it established, it's very, very hands-off. Another one is bush daisy. That's a very common one. And lastly, you can never go wrong with purple coneflower. The echinacea is an amazing annual perennial that you can use in your landscape at any time. It's just a beautiful, beautiful form, texture, color. And I even like it once they die. The seed head, that brown seed head, I think adds a really cool texture to the landscape. In this picture, you're actually looking at the native milkweed, the Asclepias tuberosa, specifically that species. Great question, I should have mentioned that. But yeah, that's the native milkweed, the tuberosa. And you can get these in Alachua County. You can get these at a couple different places, but it's always worth making sure you call to see if they have it in stock or not. So let's go ahead and we'll jump right into the shrubs. So the shrubs, I love this one. I think I've been saying that about every single plant. It's one of my favorites. But firebush, it's one of our natives, the Hamelia patens. This dude is tough. Zones 9 to 11, partial shade to shade. And again, one thing I really like about this is look at that bright red color. It prefers that part shade to shade. It's a really nice plant. If you have like a natural area, you kind of pocket this along the edge of that natural area. If it's a little bit deeper shade, or if it's in that part shade, the shade conditions. And when it's flowering almost year round, you're gonna have that warm red colors just year round, attracting different wildlife, or attracting a lot of our pollinators, because it's a great nectar source for a lot of our different butterflies. Yes, and one of our master gardener did mention that once they're established, they can withstand heavy sun. It's not their preferred, but they can do it. They're very adaptable, but that establishment period is very difficult for them. They like the well-drained soils. They have a moderate drought tolerance. So the native Hamelia patens, it's a large shrub, so 8 feet by 7 feet. But there's a bunch of different cultivars that are available. One is called a lime sizzler. It's like a dwarf variety that's like variegated. And there's another dwarf cultivar. I cannot remember the name of it, sorry. But this is a great plant that you can use in those shadier conditions, those part shade to full shade conditions. Nice and well drained. Once they're established in the landscape, they are tough and dependable plants. This is one that a lot of horticulturists with IFAS or a lot of extension agents, we all agree that this is a plant that we wish we could see more of in the landscape. Texas sage, I love the flowering Texas sage. There's so many different cultivars available. But I really like with the Texas sage, its ability to withstand full sun, well-drained soils. It takes a beating in the hot, hot sun. It does really, really well. So it doesn't like the excess of moisture at its feet. It needs that really well-drained soil, really high drought tolerance. But just look at the color when it's flowering, vibrant purple colors. But what also I really like is it's a very light green color. That light green color is such a great contrast to other foliage or other plants in the landscape when you have those dark greens. So having a contrast between those green colors add a lot of interest. But I mean, the prolific flowering that you can get with the Texas sage really adds a substantial wow factor to the landscape. So it could be a really good specimen plant, as well as a massing plant that you can use. So this is a wonderful plant. I would recommend, if you're looking for something like this, shop around at look for different cultivars or varieties, because there's so many available. This is our native coral bean. The zones 8 to 11. It likes at full sun to partial shade. It likes well-drained soils, and it has a really high drought tolerance. Usually in North Florida, it might end up freezing back, depending on what our winters look like. This past winter, more than likely your coral bean didn't freeze back, because we had such a mild winter compared to normal. But they can get pretty large. But one thing that I really like about them is the flowers. They have very unique flowers. They pop up out of the plants, and they kind of like little fireworks, that warm red color. But also, I really like the leaf shape. It's such a unique shape of leaf that in itself adds a lot of interest to a landscape. Usually, we'll see this coral bean, not necessarily as a specimen plant, but I like to see it as an accent plant, because it does have a more naturalistic form. So it's really nice in a naturalistic landscape if you live along a wooded area. But it also does really well as a container plant as well. But anyways, this naturalistic plant, you can use it as a specimen or accent, but just be careful on how you use it, because its form can go all over the place. Ooh, a sweet almond bush. So the sweet almond bush, it's USDA hardiness zone 8 to 11. Ooh, you can smell this thing when it's flowering. I love the smell. I know, though, that some people, it's too potent of a smell. It's too sweet for them. And the same thing goes, I know gardenias sometimes are too sweet of a smell for some individuals. But it does well in that full sun. It needs like medium drainage, but it does have a high drought tolerance. And if it's given the correct conditions, it can get pretty large, about 8 feet by 8 feet, which is awesome. but other plants that are similar to this, like a pepper bush or a scorpion tail, those are always good alternatives to this if you have slightly different environmental conditions. And I have to do this one. I love this one, blue stem palmetto. You know, our sable miner, the native, 7B to 11. It does prefer the partial shade, well-drained soils, has very high drought tolerance. And one of the things that I really, really like about it is its form, its texture, its shape, its ability to kind of, it's very iconic to the central part, or it's a very iconic to Florida. But one thing that I really like about it, very similar to the Texas sage, is the blue stem palmetto can get like that slight greenish blue hue to it. So it adds such a dynamic color to a landscape. But you have to make sure that you give it space to grow, because it can get pretty large. The notes are wrong at the bottom. I apologize. I'll correct that. But they should be all flowering right now, or about to start flowering for some people. But the fruits are edible. Sometimes people collect them. You have to be very careful on that though. But they prefer that partial shade to well-drained soils where they have a really high drought tolerance. If you're trying to look for something to create like a naturalistic landscape, I really like seeing like blue stem palmettos or our saw palmettos amongst pine trees and some of our native grasses like our Fakahatchee grasses. I think it creates a beautiful landscape if you have that space for it though. But there are some dwarf varieties or like smaller varieties you can get, but they're a little bit harder. So bonus plants, some of the other ones that I really like is bridal wreath. That's the one that you see pictured, or spirea. It's just an explosion of colors when it's flowering. It's a very nondescript plant, I do admit. It will look a little lakey at times, but when it's flowering, it's just breathtaking. So spirea, it's a very tough plant. Rosemary you can grow. It's almost bulletproof. Well-drained soils, high drought tolerance, loves at full sun. The tall plum, that's a really good one, as well as fetterbush. I really like fetterbush. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna jump into the end of, or the last section, which is gonna be palms and trees, because we got about 10 minutes left before I can open up to questions and everything. The palms and trees, who knows what that is in that picture? Go ahead and put that in the chat box. Close. Very close. So there's some like fire spike or coral bean or pagoda. There it is. Yeah, it's a buckeye. That's a red buckeye. And it's actually, people sometimes don't associate it with Florida, but it's actually one of our natives in the north part of the state. So we'll come around to that one. I just wanted to see if y'all could figure that one out. But anyways, one of our native trees is the Yaupon holly, or the Ilex vomitoria. And I've always wanted to know like how true this is or not, but the reason it's called vomitoria, I do know it's used as tea and apparently has really high caffeine rates that it would induce vomiting. I believe it was used for ethnobotanical purposes. So a lot of our Native American tribes in Florida would use that in some type of herbals for herbal purposes. But anyways, it's native, but it also provides an amazing ornamental plant. So it is one of our hollies, but the nice thing is you can see on the leaves on the image, it's not spiky or pokey like some of our other hollies are. But it has multiple different cultivars that you can get, so it's very adaptable to the landscape in use as well as in form. So it's going to prefer like zone 7A to 9B, so if you're in the southern part of the state, or if you go down there, you're not going to see it. But it prefers that full sun, the partial sun shade, well-drained landscapes. It has a really high drought tolerance, and the Ilex vomitoria just itself, the native, it can get about 20 feet by 20 feet, so it can get sizable. But there are so many different cultivars available. So there's one called a Nana holly, N-A-N-A. That is the dwarf variety. So actually, you'll see that around Alachua County as well as U.S. campus as a shrub or a hedge. And other forms include, there's a weeping form called the pendula, and there's a columnar form. It is called Will Fleming. I believe is Will Fleming holly. So it looks very similar to like those Italian cypresses, just upright, column shape. So there's a bunch of different varieties or cultivars available of this. And one thing that's really nice is not only do you get like those little white flowers, you'll get the red berries, but one thing I think is really characteristic of the yellow palm hollies is the new growth. When it starts to create its new leaves, that new growth, it's this really rich red color, and it slowly fades to the green. So in that early spring, or when it starts putting on its new growth, you'll see that red color forming on all the leaves of the vomitoria. So that adds interest to it as well. So this is a really great native. It's really, really tough. One additional one is the sparkleberry or farkleberry. Such a unique flower. And it does 8A to 9B. And it prefers at full sun to partial shade conditions. Really well, it prefers well-drained soils and has a high drought tolerance. One nice thing is it's incredibly attractive to wildlife, and it has edible fruits. And that's a really neat thing to point out is the vaccinium. Who knows what else edible fruit that we eat a lot of that is a vaccinium, right? I eat a lot of. It'll be a tough one. One of the master gardeners got it. Yeah, it's a blueberry. So a vaccinium is blueberries. So our blueberries are vacciniums. But this one has a unique name, that Vaccinium arboreum. That arboreum, so arbor, that Latin word, arbor, tree. So this is the only species within that Vaccinium genus that can get into that large shape or that large size. So the fruit off it doesn't look like little blueberries, but it's within that same genus. So it's kind of unique. It has dark little berries on it, and that's apparently why it got its name sparkleberry, because the light hits those black berries and it glistens the light a little bit. And it got the name farkleberry because it just believed to just be misunderstanding of someone saying farkle rather than sparkle. So sometimes I say farkleberry just because I find it more entertaining than sparkleberry. But anyways, vaccinium, beautiful plants, especially when they're flowering. Jelly palm, ooh, jelly palms. So this is actually one of our most cold hardy species of palms. We can grow it actually lower than 9A, all the way up to 11. It has such a unique, has the long palm fronds versus like the cabbage palm or like the Chinese palm where it more looks like a palm. So it has those long like palm fronds to them. But one of the big things they're known for is the fruit. They create an abundance amount of fruit. It is edible. People make jellies and jams out of them. They do attract wildlife, and they're very slow growing. So you got to give them time to grow. You got to give them time to grow in your landscape. But they have the trunk has a really nice coarse texture to them. But they're beautiful plants. They prefer that full sun to part shade, moderate moisture conditions, and they do have a really high drought tolerance, which is wonderful. One of our natives is the winged elm, or Ulmus alata. The winged elm, I really like this, and you can see in the picture on the right that why it gets its name is winged elm is on the new branches of the new growth. When it's growing, it forms like little corky wings along the stem, along the branch. And that's how I ended up getting its common name. And it's native here. It has that very characteristic elm leaf. And one thing that I really like about the winged elm is it does have a medium to high wind resistance. So more so than say like our non-native elm trees. So if you're planning a landscape, and especially when we start thinking about hurricane season, you want to make sure that your landscape is prepared for hurricane recovery. So regular pruning and maintenance and plant selection are some of those things that you really consider, especially with trees during hurricane season. So a winged elm is a nice native plant. It has a higher wind resistance. It really likes that full sun, the partial shade. It prefers moderate moisture, has a very high drought tolerance. And one thing that's important to note is that you have to prune it and shape it regularly to make sure it's forming healthy branching. Because sometimes a winged elm, if you just let it go, it can cluster a bunch of its branches all in one space and it can end up being a little bit weaker at that point. So that's just something that's important to consider when you plant a winged elm. But I think just when you talk about unique characteristics of it, it does really well in our landscape. Winged elm is a wonderful plant choice. And here's the red buckeye. It looks very similar to like the fire spike flower. It looks similar to coral bean, cardinal flower. So, but in Alachua County, 9A, we are the very southern edge of its hardiness zone. So years ago when I used to live up north, this was common. I mean, I lived in Ohio for a while, so Ohio is obviously known for buckeyes, but they have multiple different species, but this is the only species that we can grow in Florida, and it's one of our native ones. But it does prefer partial shade. It does have well-drained soils, and it does have a high drought tolerance once it's established. It has these beautiful showy flowers, but it's really important to note that the dessert buckeyes, which are peanut butter dipped in chocolate, are delicious and tasty, but in real life, the seeds are incredibly toxic. So to ingest, they're cool to look at, there's nothing wrong with handling them, but it's just important to know that those seeds are very toxic. And another really nice thing about them is even though they prefer well-drained soils, they can survive extended flooding. So like say you lived along the Santa Fe River and you have an area that's prone to flooding, a buckeye could be a good plant that you can put in that area because if you end up with flooding, it won't damage the tree too terribly much. But a red buckeye is a great plant. We don't see it as much because of this being at that southern limit. If you're out in the panhandle of the state, you'll see it a little bit more. But in Alachua County, at least in Gainesville, you'll see it in some of the older parts of the city and the town, some of the older landscapes. We don't really see this in new landscapes much anymore. So, bonus plants of the palms and trees that I really like. I didn't know where to put this first one. Needle palm, it's one of our natives, Rhapidophyllum hystrix. It's a great native like palm. They stay about 6 feet tall. They're very, very slow growing. But I think they have just a beautiful form and structure to them. And they get the name needle palm because at the base of all of them, they have very, very sharp spines that are 6 to 8 inches long, and they are sharp. So always just be careful if you're ever handling them. But they're a unique plant because they too are, since they are native, a lot of Native American tribes would use those needles for sewing, etc., making things. So it's a really cool plant that has that background and history associated with it as well. Other ones include a sweet acacia. I really like the sweet acacia, but it can be a messy tree. So usually that's going to be a tree that you put in an area that you're okay with the mess. Don't put it along sidewalks, don't put it along roadways or anything like that because it'll end up dropping some things. But other than that, it's just a really tough plant, full sun. It really likes the drought. It does well in high drought conditions. French tree, that's a great one, Chinoanthus virginicus. And then the one pictured here, that's one I really like, is the banana shrub. It does well more in the part shade, the full sun. And the flowers I love is like a creamy white color. And once it opens up, you can see in that picture a little bit of that purple is mixed in with there. Even the purple is along the margin of the petals. But the reason it gets its name, banana shrub, I love is if you're ever around one, you get up and just smell the flower. It smells exactly like banana candy, like banana taffy, Laffy Taffy. It's the same exact smell almost. So it's just kind of really, it's a nostalgic smelling plant if you ate banana candy growing up. But it's just a unique plant to kind of show people because of its unique flower and smell, and it's just a beautiful plant. So we covered the ground covers, the annuals, perennials, the shrubs, those palms and trees, but I want to make sure that I highlight the no-no plants because there's so many plants if you go to the store that they can sell, but they're actually considered invasive species. There are certain plants that it's illegal across the state to sell, and you don't see those, but there's still a lot of plants, way more plants that are invasive that you can find in the stores. And like this one, who knows which is in this picture? Which plant is this? Yes, right away. Mexican petunia, yes. So, I mean, it's a beautiful flower, beautiful flower. You can see why people planted it, but it became invasive. But you can find this everywhere. So Mexican petunia, even the sterile varieties, we're now starting to look at with a little bit of caution because they're actually showing signs of being invasive as well. So if you're ever interested in trying to find what plants are invasive, what are not, we always encourage people to double check. You can always go to UF, this link that's on here, but UF IFAS assessment. And it's just a page where we post all the information about all the plants that have had assessments on, and we can see if they're invasive, if they're caution plants, if they're safe. But it's a great way that you can double check to make sure that you're being responsible and planting plants that are not, we shouldn't be putting in the landscape, like Mexican petunia. Another very common one that we see around Alachua County is the Boston fern. Boston fern is very invasive here. But one of the things that's really stinks is it looks very similar to our native sword fern. They're this sword fern. They're the same genus, just slightly different they're just different species. But how you tell the difference between a sword fern, a native sword fern, or a Boston fern, really the only way is you have to pull it up. If you have a big cluster of what you think is sword fern, or you can't tell if it's sword fern or Boston fern, it's a large cluster, more than likely it's Boston fern, but if you pull it up, you'll notice like little nodules or like rooty looking galls or balls attached to the roots. That's a sign that it is the Boston fern, it's the invasive. But anyways, those are the common ones we see, but this is a great resource for you. So, but if you're looking for more ideas, especially with the Florida, you can go on to our webpage with the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. You can search it in your internet browser to pull it up. And there's a bunch of resources on there. And if you want, there's also there's an app subscription that you can get through the state, through the university. It's $3.99 a year, but it's we have a book of plant selection that's online, but the app is updated regularly. But it's a great way that you can enter what sun conditions, what hardiness zone you're in, all those environmental conditions, and then it'll pull up a list of all the plants that can do well based off those environmental conditions that you selected. So it's a really, really good resource. But at the same time, if you call my office, call our office, the Master Gardeners, we can help work with you to select different plants if you're looking for things that you can put in your landscape. And if you get to that point, if you have a great landscape, you can actually and you're following Florida Friendly Landscaping principles, you can actually get your landscape recognized as a Florida Friendly landscape. You can kind of see in the picture, it's kind of distorted, but there's a little sign that you can get for your landscape, as well as you can get a printed certificate that you can frame in your home. So everything that we talked about, going back to the beginning, we helped talk about what is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. We helped try to answer that question. So it's those 9 big principles statewide. And then we talked about which different types of plants are great, for the summer landscapes. We talked all the different plants, and I know we just talked on a few because there's so many that you can use, but if essentially you're following that right plant, right place, you'll be able to find a plant that does well in that summer landscape, regardless of where you live. And just a matter of just where does that plant prefer to grow, and does that match the area that I'm planting, or what are those environmental conditions that I'm planting in, and what are the plants that do well in here. So if you're interested in reaching out to us, here's some of our contact information. Our extension office is currently closed to the public, but we're located at 2800 Northeast 39th Avenue here in Gainesville. Essentially, we're at the fairgrounds. It's the northeast corner of Waldo Road and 39th Avenue, if you're familiar with town. But there's our number. Our county director is Dr. Cindy Sanders. But if you want to reach out to me, shoot me an email, as well as other ways that you can keep in touch with us. We have a new podcast that we started last month called Extension Cord, and it's pretty much, we're going to do it statewide idea of talking to different researchers, specialists, volunteers, kind of see what's happening with UF and an extension. But we also have our Facebook page, as well as we have a YouTube channel. So feel free to reach out to us on those. And what I'm going to do is I will follow up tomorrow with everybody that's registered with a copy of the presentation, as well as some further information, to accompany what we talked about today. So that's it for the presentation. We have the ability to help answer any questions that anybody has, and we can help you out with those. So we had one question come in. It said, I have heard that with very sandy soil, it's great to use cow manure when planting, sold in yellow bags. So that is, oh no, I lost its name all of a sudden. Sold in yellow bags. Black cow, K-O-W, black cow manure. And it's not necessarily using the cow manure, but what you can do in sandy soils is you can amend the soil with organic material, and that can help with moisture retention and nutrient enrichment. So it's not necessarily specifically manure, but more organic material. So one more question is about struggle to design a garden and wonder if we have any resources to help. Yes, we actually have a bunch of IFAS publications on how to design landscapes. And you can also reach out to me with specific design questions, because I actually have more of I have a background in landscape architecture and planting design, so I can help answer those types of specific questions. So what I do want to put in the comments, oh, that's the wrong thing, is I do have a survey that I'd like everyone to fill out. It's just a follow-up survey just to kind of see how we did. It kind of helped. We use it as a way to help improve our programs. In the email that I send out tomorrow, it'll include that link as well. So we did have another question that came in that was, where do I get organic material or just organic residues? So it's tough. So we actually have some wholesalers around town, around Alachua County that you can reach out to, and they can deliver them. We have programs where we can teach individuals about how to do composting, or we have information about composting at home. So if you want to reach out to us specifically on where to get specific materials or supplies, feel free to reach out to us. We have a list of that we can send to you. So we have one question about sago palms. Can I comment on sago palms? So sago palms are great plants. They're tough. So they do have a scale that can be problematic to them. So it's just a matter of making sure, that you monitor them regularly, because you don't want to get that pest to get out of control. But there's different types of sago palms, queen, king sago, what other ones do we have? But, and they can vary in height. But yeah, sago palms are great plants, yeah. So, and they're not actually a palm, they're a cycad too. So, but they do have a palm-like look to them. One question is deer poo a good fertilizer? Good question. It can be, but it really depends on the source. So animal manure can be good fertilizer sources. It has a tendency to break down pretty quickly. But the only thing is, you know, any type of manure that you're using that's just collected, what did they eat? What were they eating? Because there could be some residual herbicides that somehow they end up picking up. That if you put that out on the landscape, can impact your plants. So it's you have to just be careful with that. The next one is, can you tell us which nurseries carry native plants? Great question. What we'll do is I'll send out tomorrow with to everybody that's registered that resource list, because we have a few native nurseries here in Alachua County, and I can get that contact information to everybody. So another one was, what works best to keep hanging plants from drying out so soon? So I have to double check, I always mix them up, but sometimes depending on what type of soil you have in there, it's drying out, you can add, I have to double check, I can't remember if it's vermiculite or perlite, but one can help retain moisture a little bit better. As well as there's some other things that you can do. Try to increase organic material if possible. One of the master gardeners mentioned that the core, or like the coconut liners, can be effective to help with retention of moisture. Great question. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I have a few more questions that popped up in the chat box that I'd like to address. So one question is, what fertilizer is good for coonties? So coontie is a cycad, but typically a general fertilizer will be fine, but sometimes it might be worth using like those palm and cycad based fertilizers, or specifically fertilizers, because it'll have micronutrients in it that typically we see as in deficiencies. So it'll have a little bit more manganese or magnesium built into them than other general fertilizers. So just look for that specialized fertilizer, just so it has those additional micronutrients that they'll prefer. So that's all that I have popped up here. So if there's any other questions, feel free to email them to us, send them to me. You can reach out to our Master Gardener help desk. But thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I'll follow up with some more information in the future. But like I said, feel free to reach out to us or our Master Gardener volunteers at any time if you have any questions or if you need help with anything in your landscape. I appreciate it, and I want everybody to take care. Thank you.